Okay, hello and welcome to Basic Folk, where we have honest conversations with folk musicians. I'm Cindy Howes, and we are breaking the format today in a way. Very excited to welcome David Dye from WXPN and former host of the World Cafe, which is a nationally syndicated program on NPR. Before we get into what David and I talk about, let's thank our sponsors for Basic Folk. Basic Folk receives support from McDean, songwriters who love each other. McDean would be delighted to send you a free CD of their first EP, The Sampler Plate. Email lin@mcdean.co, lin@mcdean.co to get one. Basic Folk is brought to you by motivational life coach Janet Forrest, who believes it's never too late to ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? Mention Basic Folk and you'll receive 25% off your first month of coaching when you visit janetforrest.com to get started. David Dye is a public radio music host pioneer. I can remember the first time I heard David Dye on the World Cafe. I believe I was still in college, and I heard him on WUMB in Boston. And I thought, man, this guy is really awesome playing these great music selections. It was early 2000s. So by then, the radio landscape had changed immensely than what we were used to listening to radio growing up. Whatever time period you grew up in, I grew up on radio from the 80s into the 90s, and it sounded so much different in the 2000s. However, what David Dye, WXPN and NPR did with starting the World Cafe changed the landscape of music on the radio for the extreme better. So while I mentioned like commercial stations across the country were becoming more generic and homogenized, David was bringing an authentic and human voice to the airwaves. So David is a music fan first and was allowed to express that knowledge and passion for sharing songs on the radio to a national audience for over 25 years on the World Cafe. So as a radio and folk and music fan, I gotta say this is one of my favorite conversations to listen to that I've ever had in my entire career. I want to thank David for taking the time and being so funny, thoughtful, and also quick with his answers. I came up with so many more questions than I usually have for guests on Basic Folk, but we got through all of my questions, so very fantastic. Thanks to WXPN for letting us conduct the interview in their studio, and thanks to everybody there at XPN. Everyone there is super cool, and I really enjoy visiting the station anytime I'm there. And we talk about a lot of stuff here on Basic Folk with David Dye. The thing that relates to folk music is that we talk about, it's so funny, we talk about the rigid rules of folk radio, which I think I'm way more fired up about than David, but we really get into that. We talk about radio nightmares. If you've ever had a nightmare for your job, like you're dreaming and you can't, you're at work and something is going wrong. That happens to every single radio DJ, and it's interesting to hear David's take on that. And we talk all about music, particularly how much we both love Steve Winwood. It's just a very fun conversation. I hope you enjoy it. David actually is he talked about how he got into radio because he wasn't a very good musician. So I don't have a clip of music to play from David Dye, but I do have links on my website to some of his interviews, including one with Sarah McLachlan that he particularly enjoyed. And you can find show notes at cindyhouse.net. But let's get into our conversation with David Dye.
I'm comfy.
David Dye, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, it's great. It's fun to be interviewed.
It probably doesn't happen too often.
Back when I sort of gave up World Cafe, there was a bunch of interviews, but nothing really long form. So.
Right. You're not interviewed as much as like Bruce Springsteen or anything. But,
no.
Yeah.
No.
So can we talk about your early life a little bit, where you grew up and what your town was like?
Wow. My father worked for Scott Paper Company. So by the time I was in elementary school. I've been in 3 different towns. Where I was born in upstate New York, and Glens Falls, which was near a Scott paper plant. Then we moved to Seattle area, and it was completely, I mean, you go out to the Seattle area, Puget Sound, anywhere out there, it's just like chock-a-block houses. And they were like woods, and it was really kind of cool.
What's chock-a-block house?
Just like a house here, a house here.
Like row house kind of situation?
Almost, yeah. But they're all on their individual lots, but they're very close to each other now. But that was not like that then. We could walk down my little country road to the woods, and it was cool. And then I moved to Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, which is right outside of Philadelphia.
And then what was your early connection to music like? Where were you finding it? Who was bringing it to you?
In any real sense, I got to give credit to my sister. She is 7 years older than I am, and she went off to college, and she came back, and she had discovered the civil rights movement and Bob Dylan at the same time.
Whoa.
Which, makes sense.
Yeah.
And she introduced me to Blowing in the Wind and Pete Seeger. So I entered music. Everybody has an entry point. I talk with Dan Reed, who I work with, and he has a punk rock entry. And my entry place to the world of music, which was really what I was into more so than radio at the beginning, was folk music. So.
Yeah, that is very true that there, people who work in radio, there are radio people and then there are music people, and you would consider yourself a music person.
Yeah, I would if I had to choose. What happened is I think I wanted to be a musician, then I kind of sucked. And my fallback position is, well, I will play the songs I love by other people.
What kind of music were you performing?
Well, it had to be a blues because I only knew 3 chords on the guitar, so...
But can you still play now? Like, can you pick it up now?
That's a really great question. I haven't tried in a number of years, but yeah, I could find my way around simple keys.
Well, what about radio? Like, when did your relationship to radio start, and how has it evolved over the years?
Obviously, I was first a listener, and I would listen to Top 40 radio in Philadelphia, and I just got fascinated with. I used to watch the charts, and I was really kind of into it.
And what time period was that when you were first getting in?
Oh, now we're getting there. So we're talking like I was born in 1950. So I see when I was about 8, I kind of got into it. That would be 1958 to I graduated high school in 68, and big transitions in radio and music in that period of time. So,
what was on the top 40 station when you were listening?
Oh, when I realized it was like Dion and the Four Seasons, and slowly this group from England started kind of taking over, and we started hearing British Invasion stuff and Sonny and Cher. And meanwhile, my love for Bob Dylan, he was not represented on the radio, at least not on Top 40. Yeah.
Wow.
So
that's interesting to think about.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It absolutely is, and I think that is the style of radio that we're all kind of attracted to now, I think grew out of the fact that it was an underserved set of listeners whose tastes had evolved away from what was presented on Top 40.
Yeah. You weren't hearing Bob Dylan or Joan Baez.
No.
Joni Mitchell, probably not either.
Not at all.
No. So you've been doing radio since you were 19. You went to Swarthmore College, and I read that you were actually a history major when you started.
Yeah, I had to pick something, and it seemed appropriate. I did not admit to myself that what I wanted to do was to be on the radio until really I started doing it, until my roommate challenged me to apply for a part-time job in Philadelphia. And when I got it, it was like, I can't believe I'm going to be on the radio. I did college radio, which big plug for college radio for everybody who wants to do this. I used to go up, we had a really small station, and I used to go up and practice when we weren't on the air, that kind of thing. So I think it's valuable. It's a little different now, but.
So it seems like, you've told us a little bit about where you came from, but you've lived most of your life in Philly except your adult life. So there were a few years when you lived in Maine. Mm-hmm. How did that experience affect you?
It affected me a lot. It made me realize how lucky I was to be able to do what I was doing in Philadelphia. We lived in a small station with a big signal in Maine called WBLM. It got into Portland. It got in, served the main areas. It was free form, and everybody I worked with wanted to be in Boston. They wanted nothing more than to get out of the small market and into the. And I realized that I'd made that choice to be there in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't really see how absolutely lucky I was to begin with, to be able to be on the radio in Philadelphia. It was, top 4 market, and to be able to do that. I eventually went back to Philadelphia, but I found myself living in Maine, but going to Boston every 2 weeks to see some music or do something.
Yeah, what'd you see? Do you remember anything good?
Yeah.
Did you go to there's like one venue that people lament about, the Tea Party?
That was before my time.
Oh, okay.
But the Paradise, yeah, I went there and I saw Bob Marley there.
Whoa.
That's
cool.
Yeah. I didn't see him very well. We were way in the back, but it was really fantastic.
Right.
So
that's more than most people can say.
yeah. I was in the room with Bob Marley.
Awesome. Did you ever go to Club Passim?
Yes, but not until later. Yeah.
Cool. Can we talk about how you worked on developing your on-air personality? I'm also interested in how your delivery, your taste, interest in music, and your approach to sharing music differed from other jocks.
I think I started out imitating the people I heard. I think you kind of do that, and I imitated them in all manners. I had no confidence in my musical taste, so I found out what people were into, and I studied up, and I learned so much. It was really fantastic. As far as what you play, I finally got confidence in my own taste and say, hey, this is it. But as far as delivery, I grew up with some really wonderful people here in Philadelphia, which I don't know if it will mean that much to people around the country, but there was a guy named Ed Shockey who has passed away, who was a huge Bruce Springsteen fan and Billy Joel fan and all this stuff. But he was a really very good, smooth disc jockey. And then there were on the other end of things was a guy named Michael Tierson, who I worked with, who wasn't the smoothest, but was very, very creative in how he put music together and how he talked about it and how he presented his knowledge. I, for some reason, very early on decided that being low-key was the way to go. And I think part of that was what I liked to listen to. I didn't want to be browbeat with stuff. I wanted somebody to present it rather than tell me why it's important.
It's such a fine line to walk as somebody who also is kind of like low-key in their delivery, but also you kind of have to for me it was like I had to really push out my personality and then kind of draw it back in. Does that make sense?
Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. I was never in a position, I think probably when you started, that was more what you should be doing, and the way I worked, nobody was particularly telling me that. But I've heard recordings, and boy, they should have. I was hard to listen to at the beginning.
Were you just hard to understand?
I was okay with that, but I was very affected. I kind of talk like I was on the FM radio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
With a Boston accent. Not great. I want to know about, so your on-air persona is very laid back, very casual. How does that personality compare to your actual self?
Oh, pretty close.
Same thing.
Yeah, pretty close. Although I do tend to get excited about things.
In real life?
In real life, yeah. If I'm at a show that I'm loving, I'm just like, get me away from that guy, But, yeah, it's pretty much me. I do a little show now, which I call Dave's World, where I just sort of said, gosh, I've done this long enough. I'm just going to sort of do what I want to do, and please. And they let me, and it was just so nice. And I find myself developing a Dave's World persona, which is far more low-key than my World Cafe persona.
Oh, that's nice.
Which is pretty low-key to begin with.
So when you started at WXPN in 1989, you hosted Sleepy Hollow, which is a folk show that's still on today. So what was the show like back then?
Well, here's the thing. I can see why from your perspective, you would call it a folk show, and that was certainly a big part of it. But really, the criteria was it had to be quiet. It could be any genre. In fact, you were encouraged to play any genre. And the initial rule was no drums.
What about piano?
Piano was fine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No
like
drums.
Suzanne Ciani and all kinds of new agey females and males. So yeah, that. But yes, singer-songwriters and not. I mean, you might play somebody like James Taylor, but that was unusual. You'd play people who were far less known.
Too popular.
Yeah.
So can we talk a little bit about that, like those really strict, rigid rules of folk radio?
Yes.
No question.
You must have some thoughts.
Well, I mean, I started working in folk radio in like 2000 in college, and then I worked at UMB for a little bit, which is was at one point all folk radio.
And probably had a set of rules.
Yeah, and it was no drums. I mean, at that point, things had kind of like shifted a little bit. No drums, and then the no piano thing was real. Maybe harmonica,
Whoa.
And,
so single artists doing their songs, singer-songwriter.
I think so, yeah. But I think groups were maybe like Peter, Paul, and Mary was allowed, or that might have been too popular.
Right.
Yeah, it's like a thing where it's like it can't be too produced and it can't be too popular. What did you make of those rules, and then, how did you see that progression change?
Great question. It didn't initially bother me because there was a lot of things I wanted to play that fit in that category. But then it just became, well, why not this? It's plenty quiet. The quality is there. Why wouldn't I be allowed to do that? And you have to remember, when I started doing Sleepy Hollow here, I'd been in commercial radio for a long time. And so I had some of these commercial radio rules about programming in my head. And one of them was, if you want to get more people to listen, you have to play music that more people want to listen to. and that doesn't always fit the idea of kind of a folky format as such. And I struggled with that because I considered myself aligned with the folkies. But on the other hand, I thought, it'd be nice if all of us could be doing this in 2 years and not be out of business.
Yeah, I mean, I could show you. I'm also a host on Folk Alley, and I could show you the Folk Alley library. Like, when I first started looking at it, I thought, I don't know 70% of the artists in this library. It's pretty wild, yeah.
Well, and that was certainly the situation at XPN at the time, absolutely. And there was a lot of internal conversation about that.
Yeah. Wow.
You could probably, by listening to what XPN sounds like now, see which way it went. But of course, that's time and
yeah.
Yeah.
I'd also like to have a conversation, if you're interested in this, about so I used to work at WYEP in Pittsburgh, and I think XPN's playlist and YEP's playlist in the 90s were very kind of similar, like pretty folky, like pretty adult contemporary folky.
Yep.
And now they're pretty different. We're playing more indie rock. We're playing more soul, some hip hop, some R&B. But people look back at that time and say and they still kind of think of it like, oh, YEP is the lesbian folk station.
I thought you were going to go the other way, which was, yes, that definitely happens. And the other way is, oh, man, I loved it back then. They've sold out. You get a little bit
I mean, it could go either way.
Yeah.
You can't please everybody. But that always really irritates me.
Well, your description, it was one I've certainly heard, but of course it's not fair to folk or to lesbians. So there you go. Both of which have pretty broad taste.
Right. Totally. Yeah. World Cafe came about in 1991 after the Corporation for Public Broadcasting gave XPN a grant, and the station did some research to see if there was a need for a new type of music program. What was the music like at that time on XPN?
I think the way you described it was pretty right. There was an Arab artist, an artist in the Middle East called Cheb Mami, and there was Sean Colvin in her first album. So we internally called ourselves Cheb and Sean. We kind of
that was the range that
right,
you wanted,
exactly, or that was kind of the center points. Which, if you want to play music that I hate this because it's some of my very, very, very favorite music, but playing music in foreign languages on radio is it's a deal breaker for a lot of people. They don't want to hear anything they don't understand.
And that was something that XPN did research on.
Yes, and we found out
true.
that was entirely true, although we kept doing it and still do. So,
yeah. Fight the system. I love the story. Well, I don't know if it is exactly the story, but can you talk about how you came to host the World Cafe?
Which would my semi-truthful story? I was doing weekends. I did Sleepy Hollow, and then I would do a midweek show, and I think I was making $100 a week, and I said, I can't really live on this. And they came up with the idea to do the World Cafe, and I got a job administering the grant, which was to figure out what we're going to do. Are we going to do music testing? How are we going to...
Had you had experience with that before?
No.
I can do it.
That's exactly how I presented myself. And one of the jobs was to find a host. And there were a number of people that we tried out very sincerely and tested and listened to. And some of them were good, but people kept saying, I don't think we have it yet. And I finally, just as I did to do the grant, I didn't really know what I was doing, I kind of raised my hand and said, give me a try. And they said, okay, well, you can do it for a couple of months. And I fought tooth and nail after that to keep it. So, yeah.
Wow, that's great. A big part of the World Cafe is the interview segment, and from what I understand, you were not relaxed during interviews?
That's, I think I've said that, and I think that's pretty accurate. Depending on the situation and how we're going and how well I know the artist and how much research I've done, I can be pretty relaxed.
Like, who's someone you loved to interview?
Sarah McLachlan. She was incredibly funny, and she was relaxed, and it turned out to be a great interview early on. I mean, things that didn't work, it's legend. I've talked about it a lot, is things like Lou Reed. That was a case, but you've been in this situation too, where I just admired him too much, and it was hard to get in a position. But yeah, I was very good in doing an interview where I just found out what I wanted to know, but I wasn't particularly good at the audience might want to know.
What do you think in particular makes a good interview?
I think an artist being comfortable and great stories and eliciting great stories that lead hopefully to songs. Getting off of this is my new album. You got to get off of that quickly, because that's usually what the artist is there for. And so I had a really pretty good interview kind of going with Herb Alpert before his handlers kind of told him he had to talk about the new album more, and then it just turned really not very good. Not very interesting. He didn't know that people, if they found him interesting, were going to buy the new album.
Right.
Yeah.
If you have any advice for trying to save an interview that is not going well.
I mean, I can tell a story, but that's a really tough one. I think you've got to just suss out something that they are actually interested in talking about. And I have sometimes done well with that. There's only been a couple times over the 25 years that I was doing it that I had to throw in the towel and say, hey, you're not interested in this, and therefore we're not getting anywhere.
Right. Let's just hear songs.
Yeah. And that's very, very. That doesn't feel good to anybody.
No.
But
you did an interview with Steve Winwood, who's one of my favorite musicians of all time, and would love to meet him. But I want to hear a little bit about that. It kind of feels like it was a remote interview that you were doing with him.
I've done two, I think. One of them was in Louisville when one of the first non-coms. We did that. He did a performance.
You did face-to-face interview?
Yeah, and then we went off. I didn't realize how, I don't know if he described himself that way, but kind of class structure in the UK is, not saying it's rigid, but he was kind of an upper class guy, and I didn't realize that. And he spoke in an upper class accent and was not, and it was fascinating to me. I thought he gave. I kind of liked the answers, and I knew we had a winner of an interview because he played for an hour and a half, and it was like every period of his incredibly prolific and different musical life. Yeah, I'm kind of a fan of his as well musically, but You may have been talking about another one where I did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When he had that Greatest Hits Live.
Oh, right. Yeah.
There is another question in there when you do an interview with an artist face to face versus doing it remotely. What do you think gets lost, or if anything at all, or were you able to get used to that?
Definitely able to get used to it. I used to think that I had to be face to face, and that was the way to go because you could read someone's facial expression and know more about where they were at. But then I found myself being really comfortable with having them be away, and I could lay out all my notes.
Wipe your nose and stuff.
Yeah. You've seen me. But they were away, and I could lay out my notes, and I could, scratch my butt or whatever.
You've described hosting World Cafe like being on a treadmill. What does that mean, and how do you think that affected your approach to the show?
Well, that I think was part of the problem as we went on with it. When you get into you're doing something for 20 years or so, you start covering some of the same territory. And that's not entirely what I mean by that. What I meant by it was the work load was, at least 6 interviews every week, and then putting together the shows and then voicing the shows, plus all of the ancillary stuff that goes with it. It just became not quite as fulfilling because, to be honest, 4 of those 6 people I had to interview, I'd have to kind of gin myself up to be interested in talking with them. There wasn't necessarily that much, and that was a problem. If I'm really being honest about it, part of it was my age and having interviewed all those people. The latest 20-year-old singer-songwriter didn't have. I would have to really search hard to find their story and find something about them that was going to be universal and interesting, as opposed to Steve Winwood, who had 18 different periods of his career.
Do you just want to talk about Steve Winwood for the rest of the interview?
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah. I just
Can we
think
play some?
Yeah, totally. I think he's just so nice. Like I've never met him before, but he just seems like such a nice
completely nice, and that I didn't mean to not get that across. He was so personable and concerned about everything, and generous. And sometimes, as long as we're talking about him some more, his friends like Eric Clapton and all those people, they get they're raised higher in a pantheon than he, and I think that's really wrong because every period from being a 15-year-old
Spencer
blues
Davis,
singer to the incredible intricate stuff that Traffic did to his being a pop star, he was fantastic and all of that. Do I get to join the fan club?
Yes.
Okay.
You're in.
Yeah.
You can be the VP.
Yeah.
You also host Funky Friday on WXPN and have been so for hosting for 25 years. And I read that your persona while hosting that show is let's have a party here.
Yep.
Can you describe what a party hosted by David Dye would be like and how you can translate that to the radio?
Well, now we talk about interviewing somebody and be able to see their facial reactions. Imagine being on a stage and you play a song and you see, the dance floor cleared. And you play another song and everybody's back up there. And okay, now I got to keep them dancing. And I wanted people to have a great time, and I keep it. I try to keep it loose, but at this point, I kind of know how to keep people dancing and having a good time. And it's, as you say, I've been doing it for a long, long time. And actually, before I did Funky Friday, when I was in commercial radio, I did a show called The Friday Flashback, which was on a progressive station, but was kind of an oldies thing, and I did that for 10 years, and so I kind of got Friday night down. Yeah. And if you can't make it on Friday night, when can you make it? I mean,
right.
Everybody's off work.
Yeah. I read that you said that Funky Friday has a larger black audience than the rest of the day parts at WXPN. Can you talk about how you have strived to keep that kind of cultural inclusion present in your own work?
That's a great question. I, just as with Funky Friday, I think it's quite natural that it would, because most of the music I play is from African Americans or African musicians or people from which would make sense. I think my presentation becomes something that is not quite public radio's presentation, and I think people appreciate that. And I also think there is an audience here in Philadelphia, even of African American listeners who are kind of starved and they're not getting what they want, and so they like it. But I can totally tell, and that is part of the public radio problem. It's in general, it's hard to get different audiences to buy in.
Okay to ask a question about your wife?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
She is in journalism or was in journalism?
She very much is. She, when we met, she was working for the Philadelphia Inquirer. She ended up being a columnist there, and the Inquirer kind of went the way of a lot of. It hasn't completely gone the way. It's still with us, thank God. But it became. Nobody was sure, particularly her, if they were going to be there the next year. So she kind of put the word out, and she got kind of the best job of her career, which is now she works for the Washington Post as a national feature writer, which means she travels around the country doing stories. It could be interviewing Al Pacino. She just got back from San Francisco doing a story about San Francisco, about where it is now. They've got a huge wealth disparity. They've got a homeless situation that's out of control. The people who live there don't work there because they go to Silicon Valley. It's a fascinating story, and she, as I kind of wound down on World Cafe, she got this job, and so. Lucky for both of us, her office is the front room of our house, and so she doesn't have to go to D.C.
That's nice. So, yeah. And what is her name on the byline?
I'm sorry, it's Karen Heller.
Nice.
Karen Heller.
And what is it like to have a partner who is also involved in the media? Were you both a resource for each other?
Oh, she in particular. She is an amazing interviewer. And you think about what we're doing now, particularly in a podcast, it's kind of long form. Where you're looking to have a good conversation with me, she is looking for 2 sentences out of somebody she talks to for a half an hour, right? And it's very different, but she was very helpful with me on how to frame interviews and things like that. And and she's also completely unimpressed with what I do. She could care less.
What was her best piece of advice when it came to interviewing?
Just the inevitable prep time is really important in what you do. She does an enormous amount of things to get her one sentence. Yeah.
What is your role in the Philadelphia Folk Festival?
I wish I had more of it. I host the party. It's funny. I seem to be Mr. Party Guy. On Thursday night, when they open up the festival, all the campers come and they've arrived for the next couple of days. And the festival is opened by a Thursday night concert, which usually begins with I'm trying to think of some of the people we've had at it. We've had the Felice Brothers. We had Sturgill Simpson, if you can believe it, early on. But it always ends up with a like either a reggae band or an incredibly rowdy Scottish or Irish band, and it turns into a huge party.
Let's talk a little bit more about Dave's World. It's you called it a mixtape type of show where you have tons of autonomy. Is that correct?
That is absolutely accurate. It is the most fun I've ever had on the radio. I love it. I get to spend a couple of days sitting at my desk trying to find really unusual things that people haven't heard in forever and may know, or introducing things, or I play very few new things, maybe a couple things a week, but I try to make those new things that not everybody's playing. I play jazz, I play world music, I played A Tribe Called Quest in my last show. But at the same time, I play old Townes Van Zandt and Donovan, and it's sort of, I called it Dave's World because everybody has a musical world that when they are with their friends at home, they start playing it, and that's sort of what the idea was.
Can you talk about what it was like maybe the first month and a half or so when you transitioned out of being the host of the World Cafe and were just focusing on Dave's World?
I'm really glad I decided to do Dave's World because it made a place for me to put my energy. Because as Talia started to rev up on the World Cafe, there became less of a place for me there, and certainly wasn't any necessity for a place for me. I was a bit nostalgic for it for a bit, and I love working with her because she's actually.
She's all right.
She's all right. She's a bit of all right. She's incredibly sharp and wonderful. And I never, ever, I was surprised myself. I've never, said, they should do that. I just feel like she's got it under control. And she brings all the things to it. If I can go on my little soapbox here about it, she brings all the things to it that I wasn't bringing into it. She's a woman and she's younger, and she grew up in a different musical time, and we have talked to a lot of the same people, but she brings something real special, and so I'm beyond comfortable with that.
So I recently went through a transition where I moved from Pittsburgh to Boston. I moved back home. The first month I was like, how can one person be this happy? This doesn't seem real. And it wasn't. You're up in the clouds for a little bit, and then you start to come down and things sort of settle back down to normal. But did you have an experience? Not that you disliked your hosting duties on World Cafe, but it just was a new, exciting time for you.
Well, I would come in here and I wouldn't be dreading the fact that I had to prepare for 2 interviews and put a show together, and I would smile and I would go, oh man, this is fun. I get to research something and have fun. Oh, this is great. I did love that. Sounds like you went through a much more of a life change. Yeah. She's laughing.
Sometimes I don't do a regular radio show anymore, but sometimes I still have that little alarm you better go schedule your music. Yeah. Do you still have that sometimes?
Yeah.
Who am I interviewing today?
You have the radio dream, don't you? You know the radio.
Yes, yeah.
Where you can't get it queued up and you can't find the studio, or you can't.
So I want to hear a little bit more about your radio dreams, because my radio dreams would progress as technology would progress.
Yes.
Yours?
Yes. Actually, it's very funny you say that, because lately they've been regressing, sort of, in that I can't find the CDs. I can't find the CD player. I can't find the turntable. There's just this box. I don't know how it works. and I suppose that's a little bit of that. But yeah. And it must be universal because, and it is, I think, I've talked to many people who have that kind of a dream, because there is such a lot of pressure in being a disc jockey, because it's time, right? Time keeps marching and you got to keep up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would find myself the CD would run out, and I wouldn't the time would run out and I wouldn't have another CD.
Oh yeah.
And I think my physical self would just be meh, I don't know. And then my mental self is so angry that I couldn't get my body to
exactly
to move and find something,
exactly.
Solve the problem. That was fun. Talk about radio nightmares. You have worked in music radio most of your career. There was a short period of time where you worked at NPR, WHPN.
Oh, I wasn't on the air.
But you were.
Yeah.
What were you doing there?
I was basically in fundraising.
Oh, okay. All right. So most of your radio career has been in music radio. You've been working at the junction of bringing musicians and music fans. Your job allowed them to meet at this really special intersection. Can you talk about what you like about making that connection for both musicians and listeners?
It goes back to that very first thing I said when I wanted to be a musician and couldn't cut it, so I decided to play other people's songs. I just love turning people on to music and hopefully making that connection. I mean, it is kind of the mantra of XPN is, we are introducing musicians to audiences. But when it's working well, I think it's sort of what you're alluding to. It's kind of magical. And the problem is it's radio and it's not happening in real time, so you don't really know. But you can have a pretty good feeling that you're getting across what you want to get across, that's special about the musician.
I heard that recording of Bruce Springsteen dedicating a song to you when you moved back to Philly. Was that in 1989?
That would have been
Ish.
That was actually before that. It was,
okay.
It was more 79ish.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, 79.
Yeah.
So, and he remembered you being a big supporter before you were even at XPN. And I've been trying to get you to talk about this a couple times during the interview, but I don't think we've exactly nailed it. But that dedication, particularly before you were at World Cafe, speaks volumes to me about what radio can do when it's in the right hands.
Oh, yeah. I could talk about this. I actually made it, the night I first saw him, made it into his biography, although he had it completely wrong. And I can't wait to tell him. I saw him at the equivalent of Passim's in Philadelphia, the Main Point, and my mind was completely blown away. I mean, this was way before he became big. It was like seeing it was sort of like a great bar band, and he had so much energy, and the band was unbelievable. And I went and I played him on the radio, and then I one time after he'd been there, I got his manager to say he could have a hotel room, because they didn't do those, because they didn't have any money, to stay overnight to be on the radio with me the next day. And so he came in and got a chance to interview him. And still never felt this whole concept of connecting audiences. I never felt that everybody knew about Bruce Springsteen, but sure, the people who listened to me did. I mean, they just, that was really, really fun.
So that's a great story, and I want to hear from you, like, what you can say about the importance of radio building a sense of community for those in the music world, like Bruce Springsteen. You moved back to town. I just left Pittsburgh, and a bunch of local musicians were very vocal about me leaving, which was lovely.
Which was like, what are we going to do without you? Or you've done so much for us already.
Right, and you come back to Philadelphia, and Bruce Springsteen is like, David Dice here.
Yeah.
This is, this thing is going to happen.
Yeah. I've never lost that feeling of how cool it was for him to acknowledge and remember that we were involved. As I said, I wasn't sure what we did, but if he's talking about it, must have done something, right?
There is something that happens, I think, when a person who works at a radio station, I can only say this because this has only been my experience. So you work at a radio station, you make an actual human connection with a musician. You play them on the radio, you have them in studio, you keep in touch with them.
You go back to the show.
You go back to the shows. That really means something to have a representative of the radio station be part of that community.
Yes. I remember early on hanging out with, Lokakani, and getting to know him at a party and, enjoying that. There are other, I feel like I've been lucky in a number of cases on a national level to have that happen with people like His Golden Messenger and others. And I've had amazing moments like going to a concert in North Carolina and surprising Josh Ritter, to have him just go, oh my God, you're here. This is really cool. It's a wonderful feeling,
yeah.
and it's. I also feel. I don't know if you were suggesting this. It's a feeling you can't force. You have to have had that reaction to the musician yourself. You can't try to become someone's good friend. It doesn't work that way.
Definitely. And I think when I was leaving town in Pittsburgh, we had this big party, and I had two of my favorite local bands play, and my friend said something on stage to me that I hadn't even realized that I had done. And he said, you coming to the shows, showing up, it was like we had an ally, we had an advocate.
So great.
And it encouraged them to like keep going maybe longer than they would have done. So it's just maybe a special thing that, I had never had that pointed out to me before, but that's what reminded me when I heard Bruce Springsteen on stage talking about you.
That is a wonderful, wonderful feeling. It's wonderful that the musicians would recognize that and actually acknowledge it. That's so cool.
Yeah.
That is so cool.
It is cool. Can you stick around for the lightning round?
Sure.
Okay, great. We'll be right back. Basic Folk is brought to you in part by Tina and Her Pony, a queer duo bringing traditional Appalachian music and vocal harmonies into the 21st century. Visit tinaandherpony.com. This episode of Basic Folk receives support in more ways than one from motivational life coach Janet Forrest, who helps individuals see their own potential, overcome obstacles, and move forward. Visit janetforrest.com and mention Basic Folk. You'll receive 25% off your first month of coaching. And thanks to WIUP in Indiana, Pennsylvania, which airs Basic Folk 2 p.m. Eastern every Saturday. You can listen on 90.1 if you're in the Indiana, PA area, or at their website, wiupfm.org. Okay, David Dye, this is the lightning round.
Okay.
You'd give me one-word answers or a sentence or two.
Gotcha.
All right, you ready?
Yeah.
Dogs or cats or something else?
Dogs.
What is your coffee order?
It's unfortunately a decaf latte with 2 shots.
Not bad. Favorite teacher?
My favorite teacher was my art history teacher at Swarthmore.
Why?
He swore. He was fantastic. He had an incredible world vision, and I'm calling him he, but he transitioned years and years ago before people did that. So he was just fascinating. Incredible mind. She.
First album you bought with your own money?
First album I bought with my own money would have been Times They Are Changing.
First concert?
First concert, this is going to sound like I'm bragging, was Tim Buckley opening for the Jefferson Airplane.
Okay, that's fine. That sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
Beatles or Rolling Stones?
Used to be Beatles, now it's Rolling Stones.
Whoa. Morning person or night owl?
Morning person.
If you were to play a guitar, would it be Gibson, Martin, or Fender?
Telly.
Wow, okay. Flying or invisibility?
Invisibility.
What's the most beautiful place you've ever visited?
Honeymoon Bay on St. John in the Virgin Islands.
All right. David Dye, you did great.
Yay!
Thank you for doing the lightning round.
That was fun.
And thank you for being on Basic Folk.
That was great. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for checking this out. Very long and lengthy and very fun conversation with David Dye of Oral Cafe. You can check out his show Dave's World, which airs Sundays on WXPN in Philadelphia. And you can find out more information at their website or at my website, cindyhouse.net. Laura McCarthy produces Basic Folk. Lindsay Myers is our business manager. Alex Stanton of Townspeople does our music. I'm Cindy House. I host the thing. I got a really great tweet from my friend Abby recently that was like, you sign off podcasts the way that I try to sign up voicemails. And I take that as a huge compliment because I actually don't know the best way to wrap up the podcast. So I just like ramble for a couple of minutes until I've given like a satisfactory outro, which it's hard to tell. So if you have any feedback on my outro, would love to hear it. Also, sign up for the Basic Folk newsletter at my website, cindyhouse.net, and our Facebook group, Basic Folk Basics. It's awesome. I post a lot of feelings in Basic Folk Basics. So if you're interested in my feelings, you can go check it out. And we'll see you next week. All right. Bye.